Chapter 19 is fair housing. I am of the belief that we should teach fair housing first and not last. And that's really the way I feel about it. And that's how important it is. Now, you're going to get 3 or 4 questions on the test, I know, on fair housing, okay? Because it's that important, honestly. So there are a couple of dates in there. We're going to need to talk about equal housing, things of that nature. And that's what we're going to discuss right now. We're going to get into that. This is fair housing and ethical practices. Now, the first thing that we talk about is what's our purpose here? What is the purpose of civil rights? And the civil rights law is to create a marketplace where all persons have the opportunity to live where they choose within their financial means. All right. Now, failure to comply with laws is a criminal act and grounds for North Carolina Real Estate Commission disciplinary action. The Real Estate Commission is the least of your worries. Okay, because if you get a fine HUD fine, Housing and Urban Development fine, or you get something from the Department of Justice, you're going to go to jail. Okay, or they'll fine you so much that they'll take everything you own. HUD fines start at $10,000 first offense, $25,000 second offense, and if you're lucky enough to still have a license at the third offense, it's $50,000. That's what the fines are. Not covered by errors and omissions insurance, and it is out of your pocket. Now, also, if it is Department of Justice fines, they start at $100,000. Choose your money, right? Choose your battles. Now, really, how hard is fair housing? This is why can't anybody just buy? I teach fair housing in post-license, continuing education. I teach it for North Carolina. I teach it for South Carolina. I teach all of these fair housing classes. And every time I start a class, I always say, why do I have to teach this class? Why? What's the point? If somebody walks into my office, I don't care who they are. I want to know, do you have the money and where do you want to go? Is it that simple, or am I overthinking it or underthinking it? What is so hard about that? And that is where we start our journey, is the fact that all of a sudden we have in our head that we know what's better for our clients than they do. And guess what? We don't. We're there to advise them. We're there to counsel them. We're there to share our judgment, but not to direct them to where they should go. It's not your job. That is not your job whatsoever. All right? It is up to them to decide where they want to go. All right? And even whatever you think, it doesn't matter. But let me say this. Regardless of how you do your business, get consistent. Make sure you do what you do for one, you do for everybody. So all of your clients that come in and meet you at the office, are they all pre-qualified? Because if you pick and choose who you're going to pre-qualify, you're going to end up with a problem. You're going to end up with a problem because they're going to find out that you were discriminating. All right? And discrimination could be anything. Okay? Discriminating should be anything. An example would be that an Asian American couple comes into your office and says, we only want to see Asian American communities. And you say, okay, I'll take you to them. Seems fair, right? Seems easy. If you get caught, if there are testers, and we have testers, when we get done, they're going to want to ask you why you know those communities are Asian American. Why do you compile that information? Where people live? What communities are what race? It happens. Oh, yeah. African American, Hispanic, Asian American, all of these. So it's not information that you should compile. I will show, do you have any, if somebody came in and asked me that, I would say, do you have any specific that you want to look at? What are you looking for? I don't really compile that kind of information, but do you know where it is? And then you got to find them. If they want to go to a specific neighborhood, I'm all about the specific neighborhood, but not because of the makeup. Not because of the makeup. I'll show them other houses that are suitable in other communities, but not because they're Asian American or African American or Hispanic, not for that reason. All right, because it is a fair housing violation. So first of all, it's the right thing to do. Second of all, it's a fair housing violation. Again, we need to pay attention to these things. If federal, state, and local laws are violated, the most severe penalties will apply. So like I said, the real estate commission is the least of your problems. Okay, I don't ask you to remember many dates. There are 4 more coming, but we remember 1978. What do we have to do in 1978? Houses built before 1978, we do what? Could they ask to see houses near a synagogue? I would be happy to show them houses near a synagogue if they told me where the synagogue was. Or I would look at, okay, here's the synagogue. Let's see houses in that development, but not because it is Jewish, not because they want to go see a Jewish, but here's the synagogue. Let's see what we can find in your price range around there. What's your width? How far do you want to go? 15 minutes, 20 minutes? And then we show them everything. We want to mix it up a little bit. We don't want to just show them particularly Jewish communities, right? So they have a landmark, that's something else, right? All right, 1978 is lead-based paint. All right, put that one aside, because the other 4 I'm going to give you are going to be from this chapter. The first one is the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Civil War has ended in 1865. We're in Reconstruction. We're going forward. So in 1866, the Civil Rights Act puts together an act, right, that says it prohibits discrimination on the basis of race and color in sale or rental of any real or personal property. In 1968, Jones versus Mara, the Supreme Court said that there can be no exceptions to this based on race, okay? Because we're going to see there's a couple of exceptions in fair housing, all right? But race is not one of them. They can't use race, all right? So in the Reformation, when we were doing the Reconstruction in 1866, we came up with the Civil Rights Act, number 1. Second date you need to remember is 1968, and that is the Federal Fair Housing Act. This law was signed on April 11th, 1968, which was exactly 7 days after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And what this did was it took race. Now, we said that there are going to be 4 items that are going to be protected classes. They added religion and national origin to race and color. Technically, color was added in prior. Race was first, then color, then religion, national origin. So now in 1968, we had 4. Okay, we had 4. So we have race, color, religion, national origin. 1974, we had added 1 more, and that was sex. We could not discriminate male versus female. 2021, we added a couple of things to that sexual category, and that includes now sexual orientation and gender identity. So we can't discriminate male, female, sexual orientation, or gender identity, any of those 4. They fall into that category of sexual discrimination, 1974, all right? So race, color, religion, national origin, sex, here's 2 more. 1988, we get handicap. It came in as handicap. We're changing it up to disability, okay, disability. And then familial status, familial status. We'll talk a little bit about familial status in a moment. Well, let's do it now. It's not about how many people you have in a family. It protects children under the age of 18. You can't discriminate because somebody has a child under the age of 18. As a matter of fact, 3 things. Under the age of 18, you can't discriminate. You cannot discriminate a woman who is pregnant or anybody who is about to gain custody of a child. You may not discriminate against any one of those 3 under the familial status doctrine, okay? Now, disability and handicap, remember we talked back at stigmatized properties, we talked about AIDS and HIV? Well, what was happening in 1988? For those of you who are too young to remember, we were like right dab in the middle of an AIDS epidemic, right? We were trying to figure out how to handle this. So AIDS and HIV became part of this. We could not discriminate versus anybody who's had AIDS or who has it or HIV, and they fell under the handicap doctrine or disability doctrine now, all right? So that fell in there. That's why we can't talk about it when we get to a house. AIDS and HIV is a taboo subject because it's a fair housing violation, okay? if you don't have a picture of this slide or you can't get a hold of this slide is going to be relatively important. All right. So here are the dates. 1866, right? 1866 is a Civil Rights Act, gives us race and color. Federal Fair Housing Act, 1968, gives us religion and national origin, adds to that race and color. So now we have 4. Housing and Community Development Act gives us sex. Now that's that's an addendum to the Fair Housing Act, but they call it the Housing and Community Development Act, which is 1974. That gives us sex. That makes 5. And then the Fair Housing Amendments Act, 1988, gives us disability and familial status. All right. That's a pretty important slide. This next one might be an important slide too. And this is how you can remember all of those different categories. Okay. So just look at the acronyms in the front. Look at what it spells in the red. Fresh corn. F is familial status, R is race. E stands for equal rights for all. S is for sex, male, female, sexual orientation, identity, gender identity. And H is handicap or disability. Again, it went into law as handicap. C is color. O is opportunity for all. Religion is R. National origin is N. So fresh corn. The E and the O stands for equal opportunity for all. That's what it stands for. Don't worry about that book and chart example on page 477 in your book. It's confusing and I don't want to confuse it more. Just remember those dates that we talked about, all right? Let's talk about familial status. Again, same way we talked about it before, but remember it, okay? Women, anybody who has a child under the age of 18, anybody who's about to adopt or get custody of a child under the age of 18, and any woman who is pregnant, they fall under the familial status protection. Now, a dotted line to that next line there, it says per HUD occupancy status, 2 heartbeats to a bed, to a room. What does that mean? A mother comes in with her 10-year-old son, and all they can afford is a single bedroom house. Can they live there? 2 heartbeats to a bedroom. Yes, they can. You can't say, well, you need 2 because you got a child and you, Same thing with the father. If a father has a 12-year-old girl, you can't stop them from living together and sharing a bedroom. All right? Regardless of whatever your awkwardness meter goes off, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. 2 heartbeats to a bedroom. Right? Single fathers out there all over the place. Okay, trying to raise a family. Handicapping condition. All right, what is that? If we have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of the major life activities per ADA, walking, running, not running so much, walking, hearing, sitting for periods of time. If you see, can you see, can you hear, can you, you have mobility issues, anything that falls under that list in the ADA. Okay. Maybe you have an attention disorder. All right. Something of that nature. Okay. Those are all handicapping conditions. It also includes persons with AIDS and HIV. Also includes those. Now, if a person with a handicap is buying a house, they can do whatever they want with the house, right? They bought it. They do whatever they want. But let's say a person with a handicap is renting, and you have a rental property, and they are allowed to make reasonable accommodations as long as they replace them at the tenant's expense. So they got to make reasonable accommodations at their own expense, and they have to replace them when they leave at their own expense. Such as, maybe you have 2 steps to get up to the house. They can put a ramp in. Maybe you have sills in all your doors. If you're in a wheelchair, maybe those sills are a problem. Maybe they can take them out. Some other things they can do is they can, if you got deep pile carpet, right? Maybe they can lay down something over as a surface so that they can get around. Let's see, what else can they do? Oh, the switches on the walls. Instead of those little single switch, they can put the flat panel switches in if they want. Okay. Handles on the doors, maybe they have an arthritic condition. Instead of the round handles, the levers are easier for them to work. All of those things that might help somebody with an issue, they can make all of those changes. And then when they're ready to leave, they have to put them back. But I got to tell you, you know what happens most of the time? They make improvements for the better. And then when they're going to leave, the landlord says, well, just leave it. It's better. So unless they need the equipment that they put in there, they're going to leave it, right? They're going to leave it. It makes better sense, okay? It makes better sense. All right, so those are reasonable accommodations. Exemptions to the Federal Fair Housing Act, okay? The sale or rental of single-family homes are exempt from the Federal Fair Housing Act, but not the Civil Rights Act. Remember I said the Civil Rights Act said race and color, right? They banned it. And then in 1968, Jones versus Mayer said that you may never, ever, even if you have an exemption, discriminate on race, okay? Some exemptions, some people who are not required. According to the federal, because the state of North Carolina is going to change this for, excuse me, the first one. The home is owned by an individual who does not own more than 3 such homes at one time and does not sell more than 1 per every 2 years. This is a for sale by owner. A for sale by owner is not required to follow the Federal Fair Housing provisions, except with they got to abide by race. Okay, have to abide by race. But in North Carolina, they cannot. A for sale by owner must follow all of the fair housing doctrine. They are not excused in North Carolina. Federally, they are. In North Carolina, they are not. All right, they're not exempt. Okay. Now, also, they may not use a broker. Okay. And they can't use discriminatory advertising. The Federal Fair Housing Act says that you, as an owner, for sale by owner, cannot discriminate on race or color, but you can have anybody else purchase your property that you see fit, as long as you do not use a broker and do not use discriminatory advertising. Those two, okay? Plus the sales thing, so don't worry too much about that, all right? So those two. Now, the second one is called the rental in an owner-occupied 1 to 4 family dwelling. This is our Mrs. Murphy's exemption. Mrs. Murphy owns a quad. Say a quad. And she lives in one. With the exception of race or color, she can put whoever she wants in the other 3. Okay? Now, that law changes a little bit for North Carolina also, because if it's Mrs. Murphy or one of her family, then they can do that. She can say no kids. She can say no handicap, but she can't say it in advertising. When they get there, she says, I prefer not to rent it to somebody in a wheelchair. And she would be okay, because she lives in one. She lives in one. She can't do that for race. It's against the law to do it for race. She can do it for any of the others. As long as she doesn't advertise it, she's allowed. That's an exemption in the Federal Fair Housing laws. Just don't shoot the messenger. In this particular case, the Mrs. Murphy exemption says that she has to live in one. Well, now, a quad is a lot, right? There aren't too many quads, but there's a heck of a lot of duplexes out there. And if Mrs. Murphy owns one side of that duplex, she can put whoever she wants on that other side as a rental, as long as she doesn't discriminate because of race. Sorry. As long as she doesn't discriminate because of race. She cannot say, you're African-American, I'm sorry, I'm not letting you in. She can't say that. If I walked up there, she could say, you're a man, get out. I don't want any part of you. You're not going to rent. She can tell me anything you want, right? Go away. Or if I brought my 3 kids with me, right? I walk up to the door, she can say, no, we don't really want children. Thank you anyway. She can do that as long as she lives on the other side. That's the Mrs. Murphy's exemption. That's the rental and owner occupied 1 to 4 family dwellings. Pets are not a protected class, with the exception of service animals, which we'll talk about later. Okay. The next thing we're going to talk about is churches, religion. All right. Religious organizations. They have an exemption too. A lot of churches and religious organizations and private clubs will do them together because the exemptions are about the same. In a religious organization and a private club, both of them, some of them have rental condos, or some of them will give, let you use houses on site or units on site for traveling parishioners or for people who belong to the club. Maybe they need it. Well, the rule is that as long as they belong to the church, let's use religion for example. The Catholic Church, again, I'm just throwing something out. The Catholic Church. St. Paul's Catholic Church says that we have 10 units available if we have traveling parishioners. Anybody who is a member of our church can bring a family member to stay in one of those units. But if you're not a member of the church, you cannot use those units. Well, they can say that as long as there's no barring entry to become a member of the church. Anybody can join the church. If you don't want to join the church, that's on you, but everybody's accepted in our church. It's just a matter of our housing units. You have to be a member of the church in order to use them. Same thing with the private clubs, right? We have a private club. As long as we're not discriminatory in our practices in our private club, we can say only our club members can use those homes. Okay? As long as we don't discriminate on the using one of the protected classes to join the club. So that's how they get away with that. Okay? Now, again, anytime they have a broker, there are no exceptions. Okay? Whenever a broker's in charge, including your own, all of you folks who get broker's license, your own home has to follow fair housing, even if you're selling it for sale by owner. You're a broker. You know better. You have to follow the rules. Okay? You have to follow the rules. So that is how that happens. That is where that happens, right? So who enforces the Federal Fair Housing Act? All right. The Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity in HUD, Housing and Urban Development, Department of Housing and Urban Development. If I feel that I've been aggrieved upon, now as a white male, the chances of me being fair housing is remote. But there are women, any of you women or anybody else who's of color or anything else, all right, you have 1 year. If you feel you've been aggrieved, you have 1 year to file it with HUD, file your grievance with HUD, and 2 years to bring it to court. So you have a year, right? Now, HUD's going to fine you, but then HUD gives punitive damages too. So if you've been aggrieved in any way, shape, or form, you could end up with pain and suffering and emotional distress and all that other stuff, in addition to the HUD fine. 1 year to file, 2 years to bring it to court. The HUD has up to 100 days to determine if the charge of illegal discrimination should be filed or dismiss the complaint. Okay. Is it filed? Dismiss the complaint? What do we want to do? Well, do we think it's worth it? That's the important part of that. What are we doing? All right. Now, HUD can do what HUD's going to try to do is get the people together, sit them at a conference table, try a reconciliation, try to see why they were doing things the way they were supposed to be doing them. Right? Why didn't you rent the house to this person? Why didn't you? Why wouldn't you sell it to that person? All right. They're going to get them together before they take them to court. And if there's still no satisfaction, then they're going to take them to court. So they are going to try conciliation. All right. Get the parties together, like a mediation. All right. They're trying to get rid of that. Okay. Cases heard by an administrative law judge, fines and injunctions range from $10,000 for the first offense to $50,000 for multiple violations within a 7-year period. I doubt you're going to get to the third violation in that 7 years. If you've already done 2, they're going to pull your license. It'll be something else altogether. It won't be federal fair housing, all right? Unless you're using race as a for sale by owner. Parties may elect civil action in federal court at any time within 2 years of the discriminatory act. So you have 2 years to bring it to court. All right. Now, if it goes beyond HUD, the Attorney General gets involved, Department of Justice gets involved. Penalties range from $50,000 for the first offense. If you're a corporation, it starts at $100,000. Starts at $100,000. All right, if it's a Department of Justice felon. All right, and complaint. Now, anything that's this bottom one is relatively important. Anybody who's complaining that they have violated based on race, which is a Civil Rights Act violation of 1866, they go directly to the federal courts. They don't even go to HUD. They don't even go through conciliation. They go directly to the federal court. They're serious about this. This is not, this is not something that they're kind of pushing away. All right. So they're dead serious about it. Now, here we go again. North Carolina Fair Housing Act of 1983. These are the exemptions. All right. This is it. The prohibited acts are the same as the federal law. They match for the 7. 7 for the federal law, 7 for the for North Carolina. The exemptions are where it differs. Okay. The for sale by owner is not exempt in North Carolina. So on a state test, it may ask you, is a for sale by owner exempt from the North Carolina Fair Housing Act of 1983? The answer is no, they're not. Even though they're exempt federally, they will not be allowed to be exempt in North Carolina. All right. The second one is rental in a 1 to 4 family dwelling occupied by the owner or their family member. So maybe my kid lives there. I can be discriminatory, all right, about the other ones. As long as I don't use race, I can do that. And then in rental rooms in a single sex dormitory. If it's a single sex dormitory by rule, then I can't have males in a female dormitory or females in a male dormitory. It's just by rule, it's just what it is. So there won't be any violation there. All right. And the North Carolina Human Relations Commission is the one who administers that rule. Okay. The Human Relations Commission is the one who administers that rule. I've been talking for a few slides here, and I have not mentioned one thing you would have thought was on that list. What is it? Does anybody think they know what I haven't mentioned? What one class haven't I mentioned that you would have thought was on that list? There you go. Age. Because age is not a federally protected class, nor is it in the state of North Carolina. So unless the state, now South Carolina has added it, but North Carolina is not. Age is not protected. So there is no federal protection. There is no state protection in North Carolina. All right. But we do have what's called the Housing for Older Persons Act. And what this does is it allows exemptions for 62 and older housing and 55 and older housing. All right. And it has to do with how you set up your charters. If I wanted to have if I wanted to build a community that was age related, if I wanted only 62 and older or 55 and older, either one, I would have to develop an entire charter and apply to HUD that said all of my activities and all of my housing and everything else is based on helping older adults. Okay, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to be close to the hospital. We're going to have ambulatory care. We're going to have games, things of that nature. There won't be anything for children to do. It's going to be that. So there is a whole lot of other things that have to go into that, but just assume it's that. Now, there are 2 different types, persons 62 and older. Now, if my community is set up as 62 or older community, 100% of the occupants, it's not the ownership, it's the occupants, 100% of the occupants have to be 62 or older. Now, that's all well and good, but what happens if I have to take custody of a grandchild? Can the grandchild live there? Shake your heads no. Grandchild cannot live there. He's not 62 or older. So that's a problem there. That means I'm going to have to find him another place to live, or I'm going to have to move. Okay? So that is a 62 or older community. Now, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know a 62 or older community anymore. they've all kind of reverted to this 55 and older, because 62 and older, that's a pretty strict law, right? That's a pretty strict rule. And if anybody knows a 62 or older, let me know, because I'll definitely look it up. But most of them now are 55 and older, 55 and older. Now, what this says is a 55 and older, they relax it quite a bit. It says that 80% of the units in a 55 and older community have to be occupied by one person over the age of 55. So really, we can have 20% of our houses that don't have anybody over 55 in them. And then the others have 50%, right? Maybe somebody's 55 and somebody's not. Now, if I gain custody of that grandchild, can he come live with me? Sure, right? He fits in. So that's why we have that 55 and older. Most are 55 and older communities, okay? The 62 and older is awful strict, right? So 80% of the units occupied by someone 55 or older. As long as one person is in that unit and occupies these 55 or older, or she's 55 and older, they're good. But 20% of them don't have to have anybody, right? Be lucky. Can't kick them to the curb. It's good. And again, it's not ownership, because my kids can buy me the house, right? My kids can buy the house. Here, Dad, we're going to put you over here. Stay there. Don't leave the house, so I can keep an eye on you, right? They can own the house, but I can live there. And that would be the way it works, 55 and older, right? So again, it's not ownership, it's occupancy. All buildings, right, with 4 or more residential units constructed after March 13th, 1991, must allow access and use by persons with a handicapping condition, right? Is Alzheimer's and dementia protected status? It could fall under the handicapping provision, right? If something is somebody is not mentally correct, then they would fall under that. Now, again, why would a person with Alzheimer's or dementia want to rent or buy, particularly rent a house like that? We can put them in there. Right? Or her in there. So, yeah, there's no rule that says they couldn't. They're handicapped. There's a disability there, right? So, yeah, it doesn't say we couldn't. All buildings, all right, so all these new condos that are constructed, they are all handicap accessible. Notice that they have no sills in the doors. Usually their showers don't have a little ledge so that somebody can get in there. The sinks are built a little higher so somebody can walk under, especially in the bathrooms, right? Doors are 36 inches wide so they can get in, right? Windows are wider so they can get out. All of those things are reasons. Kitchens are not as crowded as they used to be. Even if they put an island in there, you can get around it, right? So all of those things are built for it. Now, taking this off the sheet for a second, if somebody built my house from floor to ceiling with all handicap accessible, I would be in my glory, and I'm not handicapped, right? I'm not disabled. That makes life easier for everybody. Why wouldn't they just build it and a lot of the builders are now. A lot of these builders are building these things right into the build, right? Why not? Why not? Makes sense. Equal Credit Opportunity Act, ECOA, okay? Race, color, religion, this is credit, okay? We cannot discriminate based on these classes for credit. Now, if you notice, race, color, religion, national origin, and sex came from the others, right? Came from the fair housing. They added age and they added marital status, right? Familial status, they don't care about, right? If you're under 18, are they going to give you a loan anyway? No, okay? So they're not going to put that in here. Age is in here. They can't discriminate because of age. They can't discriminate whether you're married or not, okay? And they can't discriminate if you're making if you're on public assistance. They can't discriminate against any of those. So they add those three and they take out handicap and familial status. Do they care about your handicap? I mean, if you can make the payments, they don't care if you're handicapped or not, or disabled or not. Make the payments. That's what they're interested in, right? You're fine with a loan if you have a disability. right? As long as you make payments, it's all about making money. All right, so Americans with Disabilities Act requires accessibility compliance in place of public accommodations. You own a condo, okay? You live in a condo. Well, is the swimming pool a public accommodation? It's a tenants in common, but we let people come in and out, right? So we have to be able to have that swimming pool, Americans with Disabilities Act compliant. If you go to your swimming pool, I'm willing to bet that they have a lift where somebody can sit on and get lowered into the water and then taken out of the water. That's ADA compliance, right? So these are reasonable accommodations we can make that would allow a person with a handicap to use our properties, use public accommodations, particularly in the workplace. All right, that was where the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, would take over. The ADA exemptions, if it's covered by fair housing, it's not covered by ADA, okay? And anything that's exempt from coverage by the Federal Fair Housing Act is also an ADA exemption, all right? So again, those 4 classes. So the ADA has to do with public accommodations, okay? Public accommodations. And that is, anything that we can use. If we go to a restaurant, the ADA covers it. If we're in a office building, ADA covers it. Anything that's public, that's open to the public, where we can walk on in, that is all Americans with Disabilities Act. Same thing with hiring. It falls under the ADA and reasonable accommodations. If you have somebody who can't see very well but is qualified for the job, you might have to get them a bigger monitor, or a reasonable accommodation. Maybe you need to get them a shorter chair or a bigger chair or a bigger desk or a shorter desk, or make space. Maybe all those things. Anything you can do that's reasonable, you have to do. All right. And again, reasonable to a mom and pop bakery is not the same reasonable as IBM, right? Whatever they can afford to do. So those are the things that would be there. All right. The next one, North Carolina laws against sexual harassment. Sexual harassment, particularly in the workplace, right? Unsolicited overt requests or demands for sexual acts or any sexual behavior that creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment, such as verbal harassment, even nonverbal harassment. Nonverbal harassment could be just shutting somebody out, not talking to them, not inviting them to meetings, things of that nature. Okay, that could be harassment when everybody else is. And then physical, all right, physical, okay. All of those things are part of things that you can talk to North Carolina law, and these are sexual harassment. Okay, now I said there were some important things coming up. This is the important things coming up, okay? There are 4 things that you are gonna have to remember. I'm gonna guarantee that you're gonna get these on a test, all right? The first one, we're gonna talk about blockbusting. We're going to talk about steering. We're going to talk about discriminatory advertising, and we're going to talk about redlining. So the first one is called blockbusting, all right? The blockbusting. And by definition, it says the act of encouraging people to sell or rent their homes by claiming that the entry of a protected class into the neighborhood will have a negative impact on property values. So how does that work? I know that there's a lot of children in this neighborhood, okay? I start spreading a rumor that says that there's going a sex offender is going to move in here, and they're going to move. There's going to be a couple of them. I think that they're going to release them and they're going to move into your community. Now, I have no reason to believe that. I have no fact, no anything. But what I can do by saying that is what? I can make people pretty nervous, can't I? And I also might be able to churn up some business. People want to sell, right? Or another example is I can put, let's say the community, maybe we talked about St. Patrick's Irish Church before, and everybody who lives in the community behind that church is all Irish Catholic. St. Patrick's owns a lot across the street. And I start a rumor in that Irish Catholic community that what we're going to do, what St. Patrick's is doing, is they're selling that and they're going to build a mosque there. And therefore, all of that community over there is going to bring people of the to use the mosque of the Muslim faith. Now, not everybody in that Irish Catholic community is going to be an idiot, Okay, but are we bound to have a handful of those idiots to drive up some business? Because they don't want to be any part of what's going to happen over there. That's going to lower property values. Oh, it's not, they're going to ruin the neighborhood, whatever. Call it whatever. It's just another example. So all I did was I created a panic. And that's blockbusting. What I'm doing is I'm trying to get people scared so that they move out. And if they move out, I'll be happy to help them. Based on zero information, right? That is blockbusting. I can't do that. It's against the law, against the federal fair housing law. The next one is steering. We talked a little bit about the Asian American couple that came into my office and said, hey, I want to go to only Asian American areas. Well, if I took them there, that would be steering, even on their part. So if I took them there without asking them, do you have a community in mind or anything else like that? Or if they came and asked me, Asian American couple says, I want to go live on top of Lombardi's Pizzeria in the middle of Little Italy. And I say, you don't really belong there. Why don't you move over to Chinatown? It's much nicer. You'll be with people your own type, that kind of thing. That's steering. I can't do that. If they want to live in the back of the oven at Lombardi's Pizzeria, then that's where they're going, right? That's where they're going. If that's where their money will take them, that's where they're going. So you have to be very, very careful of putting them or thinking you're putting people into places they belong. Steering, I'm the property manager. And I have 4 different buildings, all with 10 condos in each one, 10 apartments in each one. But it seems that all of the older folks are over here in that building number 1. All the African Americans are in building number 2. All of the Hispanics are in building number 3. And all of the families with children are in building number 4. Do you think that's arbitrary? Or do you think that I got a problem? That's steering. And believe me, go drive through a multi-unit complex. Now, some of that will happen because if I want to live next to my cousin, right, and we have 5 kids apiece, well, yeah, we're going to live as close as we can. But if I'm putting them in places, oh, your name is what? Espinosa, Mr. Espinosa, I got a building for you. You're going over here. This is where I have buildings. This is where I have units, right? Or anything like that, right? If I start steering them in that general direction instead of where they want to go, mixing it up, right? I am steering. They could call it channeling. I don't hear called channeling that much, but steering, all right? So we're guiding home seekers to particular neighborhoods based on their presence, right? The presence or absence of a protected class. Okay. Now, people will also say, I don't want to live in a neighborhood that's got kids in it. I want to live in an older neighborhood. I don't want kids. I don't want to be around kids. Well, you can't tell them that. You're going to have to say, well, which neighborhood is that? Do you have any neighborhoods you want to rule out? Because if I do it, that means I'm compiling what? I'm compiling fair housing information, ain't I? If I know all the statistics about who lives what, if I go to census.org or census.gov and I know how many African Americans live here, how many Hispanics live here, how many people with children live here, what's the average age, right? That's information that I don't want to compile. I don't want any part of that. Okay? Because I don't want people to think that I'm steering them to any neighborhood. I want to know what you're qualified for, what's your pre-qualification, where you want to go. Let's see if there's anything available. That's it. All right? We can't steer. We can't put them into places we think that they belong. Right? No good. All right, the third one, advertising. No advertising of property for sale or for rent may include language indicating a preference or limitation for the protected class status of a prospective buyer or tenant. I can't say no blacks allowed, right? I can't say for no children are allowed. I'm not interested in children, right? I can't do that. Or somebody comes in and they got 3 kids into my office and I say, that community doesn't really like kids. That's not my job. That's not my job. I'm not supposed to do that. I'm worried about selling houses, not about the people. Now, keep that in mind. We talked about this a while ago. Our job is to sell houses and property. We do not look at the people. I don't care. I don't care about the people. I'm going to be nice to the people, but I don't care their makeup. I don't care their background. I don't care any of that, particularly when I'm trying to put them into a home that they would like. I'm going to give them a lot of options in a lot of different areas. That's my job. Find the right house. Okay? So we're not worried about neighborhoods. So also, in this particular case, advertising, we have to be very careful. If let's say I'm going to, somebody left me in charge of, they told me, we just built a condo with 10 units in it. And we'd like to get, we'd like you to sell those 10 units. And I say, okay, that's great. I'll do the ads and everything else. So let's say I put an ad together that's going to run every weekend, every Sunday for 10 weeks. And in that, I only have, there's 4 or 5 couples on there. There are no kids in that pictures, all right? They all happen to be lily white, right? And it looks like a golf community in the background. And these folks are not young. Could that be considered a discriminatory advertisement? Now, if I changed it every couple of weeks, or I mixed up the pictures so that we have different groups, that's all fine. But if I left that the same ad for 10 weeks, somebody could be saying, now it's all about perception, right? Even though I'm not trying to do anything, it's all about perception. Somebody can say, are you just looking for old white people to live on the golf course? And they would make it very right. It could be very right in their mind. Okay, I don't see any kids here. I don't see any ethnic groups here. What's happening here? Well, you don't want anybody to live there? You're trying to close it off for that? So those are questions that you might have to answer, right? And again, it's all about perception. Next time you watch a Target ad or an Old Navy ad or a Walmart ad, don't look at the ads because it's all junk they're selling anyway, but that we buy. We're really good consumers. But look at the people in the store. Look at the people who are working in the store. Just look at the commercials. I'm willing to bet that you're going to find 7, 8, 9, 10 different classes in the commercials. They cover them all. Just take a critical look. See what you got. They cover every single base. Black, white, Asian, handicapped, female, right? All of those things you see they're going to try to cover it, right? In those ads. So not without, they try to be all inclusive, and that's what we need to be. So we have to be very, very careful of our advertising. Make sure it's all about perception, right? And number 4 here is redlining. And redlining used to be lending institutions and insurance companies. It is an illegal practice. What they used to do, these two, banks and insurance companies, they would put a map up of the area that they covered in their bank. And this is legit. This is what they did. And they would find out what the census information was for each one of those neighborhoods. And if there was a neighborhood that had a group of people that they didn't want to lend to, they would redline it on that map and say, we're not giving any loans because of who lives there. They're a bad risk. They don't pay back. Okay. They would do that with these areas of the map, and it would be a red line. Literally, that's where we get redlining. Okay. So they would take it. And insurance companies did the same thing. Oh no, we're not writing insurance in there. That's that's this type of community, and we're not, those people don't take care of their houses. Draw a line around a map. Don't go there. Where do you think we got the saying the other side of the tracks from? I drew a line on the other side of the tracks. We're not going over there. We're not giving any loans over there. We're not giving insurance over there. We know who lives over there. We're not going to say it out loud, but we're just staying out of there. That's redlining. Blockbusting, creating a panic. Steering, deciding where people belong, not letting them decide where they belong. Advertising, make sure you vary your advertisements. All right, it's all about perception. And redlining, which is what banking and insurance did, okay? That was their game plan as far as discriminatory practices, those four. All right, those four. Now, criminal charges apply for anyone who threatens, coerces, intimidates, or interferes for buying, renting, or selling a house, making a complaint, exercising any rights under the Fair Housing Law. So if somebody intimidates you about making a complaint, that's a criminal charge. If somebody complains or harasses you while you're trying to rent or buy a house, that's criminal also. It's a criminal charge. And then obviously anything that's exercising any rights under the Fair Housing Laws. Let's go back here. There is a case out there that we use in one of our classes that we'll call him Mr. G. Mr. and Mrs. G lived in a duplex. And they lived on one side of the duplex. And on the other side, they were trying to rent. And a couple came up and they were, what were they? I'm trying to think. Oh, two ladies. And they look like a couple. That was fine. But Mr. and Mrs. G started harassing them about, no, we don't want you in our place. You don't belong here. You go find another place to live. They're really nasty. And Mr. and Mrs. G spit on one of the ladies. Now, keep in mind what the exemption is. They lived in one side of the duplex. They could have patted them on the head and said, go away, thank you, we're not interested. It would have been within their right to do so. But what they did was they intimidated them and harassed them and they spit on them. The couple files charges against Mr. and Mrs. G. Even though Mr. and Mrs. G could have just said, no, thank you, what happened was they got fined $25,000 apiece. $25,000 for Mr. G and $25,000 for Mrs. G. So it cost them $50,000 for harassing somebody to come look at that house. Right? Yeah, real, true story. So, and they were, I mean, just, there's no excuse for ignorance, right? So in that particular case, they could have just said, no, thank you. We're not interested, right? We're not interested. But for that, right, they ended up costing them 50 grand. That is intimidating, threatens, coercing, intimidating, right? Or interfering. And there's other cases like that. You can go to HUD.gov if you want to, and go look at fair housing violations. There is an eternity of cases if you want to read them. They're over and over and over again. Now, if Mr. and Mrs. G were so mad at these folks, you know that when the police came knocking or some investigator came knocking, they're not going to stop. They're not going to lie about it. They're just going to say something stupid, right? If you're that bold, you're going to say something stupid. And there you go. That is, you know, that is the way it is. North Carolina Human Relations Commission is the place you go. You file your complaint. Next slide says professional ethics of brokers. Now, if you join the Realtor Board, you will be guided by a code of ethics, right? When we're talking about the Realtor organization, you're going to be bound by a code of ethics. That's their core. That's their calling. This 17 articles in their code of ethics with the standards of conduct underneath each one of them, all right? Now, not everybody is a realtor. Please remember that, okay? You have to join the board. It is a professional organization. But we need to understand ethics. We have some ethical dilemmas out there that at another time we'll discuss, but we're not going to do it tonight. But we run into them all the time. What's good? What's not good? What should we do? And where should we do? You know, where should we go with it? Right? So we always have to deal with those. Now, the best set of ethics you can do is follow the golden rule, right? I think that's the best way you can go. Follow the golden rule. So if you would want it done to you, don't do it to somebody else. Okay? Don't do it to somebody else. But we lose track of that. All right, there's no reason to be that emotional, no reason to be anything else. Person with the cooler head is always going to win. So ethics establishes standards of integrity and competence in dealing with consumers of an industry. And then define the code of ethics for relations within the industry among professionals. How we treat one another, other brokers, right? How we treat each other. What kind of information do we share? How do we help one another? Same thing with your clients, right? Again, the golden rule applies here. That's the best thing we can do, regardless of a professional organization, which is a very good organization, don't get me wrong, but if everybody used the golden rule, there would be no room for that, right? No need for that. And this is what I'm talking about, the NAR Code of Ethics, all right? It's a written system of standards of ethical conduct, started in 1913. 1913, all right? And other smaller boards often have their own codes. You can add more. You can add more, but you can't have less, all right? And this says biannual course refresher, so you have to take it. I think now it's every 3 years, okay? Every 3 years now. But it is a course refresher required for everybody who is a realtor. Now, if you go out and listen to the history of the code, it's a YouTube, you can get it. The history of the code, which is the Code of Ethics. They skip over the first president of the Board of Realtors of this realtor organization, National Association of Realtors. They skip over him. And they say they'll mention him later. And his name is August Frederick. And what happened with August Frederick was after he was, about weeks after he was elected as president of the National Association of Realtors back in 1913, he got found embezzling upwards of $4 million. So here's the guy who was the head. They literally have wiped him off the books. All right, wiped him off the books. And they don't whitewash it in the video. You can watch it. It's about an 18-minute video, but they actually tell you the story about him. They said that, you know, he's not in the book, somebody else is. But the reason he was taken out was he was caught embezzling. Nice. Put out a code of ethics and then get caught embezzling. All right, let's see if we can't get through these application challenges so we can move on. The Civil Rights Act of 1866 prohibits discrimination based on what? Right, race and color. Race and color. All right. The Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibits discrimination based on what? Religion and national origin, right? So it still has race and color in there. Religion and national origin. Okay. Housing and Community Development Act of 1974 adds sex, right? Adds sex, right? Now, sex is male, female, and as of 2021, sexual orientation and gender identification. Now, we've added those to this particular group. All right. And then the Fair Housing Amendment Act of 1988 prohibits discrimination based on what two did they add in 1988? There you go. Perfect. Disability and familial status, right? Children under the age of 18. Very good. All right, true or false? Under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, lenders cannot deny a person from qualifying for a loan based on the number of children they have. That's actually false. Remember ECOA, Equal Credit Opportunity Act? They take out familial status, right? Marital status, they can't discriminate whether you're married or not. But if you got income that makes $50,000 a year and you got 5 kids or 7 kids or 10 kids, they might take a look at that. That's not a protected class under Equal Credit Opportunity Act. All right, you're not protected. So they added that in. All right. Under federal laws, an owner-occupied duplex allows the owner to rent the other half of her residence to females only. True or false? Yeah, there you go. That's the Mrs. Murphy's exemption, right? The owner-occupied 1 to 4 unit dwellings are exempt from fair housing laws, but not the Civil Rights Act, and not when a broker is involved. Nor can they advertise discriminatorily. Okay. True or false? Age is a protected class under the Fair Housing Amendments of 1988. We gave this one away earlier. False. It is not. All right. It is in ECOA, Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Okay. They can't deny us because of our age, but it's not a federally protected or state protected, for that matter, class. This is the practice of using the changing neighborhood demographics to influence a person to sell their home. There you go. Blockbusting, right? Blockbusting. We're panic peddling. We're trying to get them crazy, right? There you go. A family asks you to show them homes only populated by a specific ethnic group of people. This is considered what? Yeah, this is steering, right? Remember, you're free to show clients the home they wish to see, but you should not provide preconceived notions as to which neighborhoods represent specific ethnicities. You don't want to compile that information because, again, you don't want to be shown steering people to different things. A buyer client recently obtained a job with the North Carolina state government based in downtown Raleigh. He asked his buyer's agent to show him only properties located near his new office complex. Is this a complaint with both the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing laws? I'm sorry. Is this compliant is the word I meant to read. I read complaint. It's compliant. Is this compliant with both the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing laws? Yeah, it's okay, right? He can do this. He can do this, right? It's not a discriminatory act. He's not looking for a specific somebody who's a protected class or a protected group, right? He's just looking to, if I'm a doctor, I want to live close to the hospital. If I'm working with the government, I want to live close to the government buildings, right? If I'm an instructor, I want to live close to the college or wherever. So there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that as long as I'm not using one of those 7 protected classes, right? So. A property owner lives on one side of his duplex and refuses to rent the other half to the duplex to a person based on their gender or national origin. Is this a fair housing violation? No, it's not. Only because the property owner lives at the property. Okay, he's not using a broker and he cannot use discriminatory advertising, but not a violation. Not a violation.
If you like this video, feel free to share it with a friend. For more real estate education content, please subscribe to the channel. From all of us at Seacoast Real Estate Academy, thank you for watching.